Chris, you have 3 highly popular products on aescripts, and for me as a product developer, for every one that gets released, there's probably 4 or 5 sitting in my work in progress folder that will probably never be completed. Is that the same case for you?
I'm a very, very stubborn person, and typically when I start something, I always do launch it. But I'm trying to think.
That's incredible.
Well, also, I'm not a programmer actually. I mean, I guess I kind of am, but I really suck at it. So I do have maybe hundreds of different plugin ideas where I started to write about it, but never actually committed to push them forward and have my team actually build them.
Right. Well, I guess because you've got to pay per hour wages, you don't start on something until you're pretty sure that it's really cool, right?
Yeah, I guess maybe the equivalent is I might have a couple of those little dirty prototypes where I just tested out a combination of effects in either After Effects or Maya or a game engine. So for Composite Brush and for Lockdown and for Paint and Stick actually, I had very crude versions of all of those working just using tools that already existed on my computer. Like
pseudo effects or actual applications?
Basically just using something like Maya to whip up what the shader might look like for Paint and Stick, or trying to figure out a filter just by using some filters in After Effects and then doing it manually in Comp to say, okay, maybe we could just automate this process. And same with Lockdown. For a very early version of Lockdown, when I was trying to get a feel for how it would work, I was using CC Power Pin or something, just 5 or 6 different instances of it to simulate the geometry.
So your products, I was wondering, being mainly comp focused, do you ever have any plans to sort of port those over to Nuke or another package?
I'd say we do have plans to do OFX eventually, but I think that the thing about it is, you would think that as a compositor I'd be moving towards Nuke because everyone sees Nuke as the top dog of compositors, and I'm not here to argue that it's not. But when you look at how many people are using Nuke worldwide, I think it's very, 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 very few. An extremely tiny fraction of all the compositing happening in the world is happening in Nuke. It's just that the best compositing in the world is happening in Nuke, like the Avengers and big blockbuster films. And in all those teams, they have, technical directors and they have programmers and they can build their own tools for their really specific needs. I find that the market for plugins is just so much better in After Effects, where there are millions and millions of people using After Effects. They're pulling keys every day. They're doing cleanup every day, screen replacements. And to make plugins, I feel like it would just be so competitive with such a small market. That's why I've stayed with After Effects, where it's so much easier to make a dent.
Right. I suppose you've probably been on Nukepedia. People are releasing crazy cool stuff just for free. It seems like the Nuke market is either you create something that's cool and you give it away for free, or you create something incredible and then charge $1,000 a year subscription for it. And there's not much in between. The Nuke market, people are willing to pay more for the product and even possibly a subscription, but you would be competing against a lot of in-house teams and a lot of really smart people, so I guess that is a bit more difficult.
Yeah, in After Effects, it's there's just so many more potential customers that just don't have in-house teams to build After Effects plugins. I've almost never even heard of a VFX house with its own development team that uses After Effects. So
yeah, and I think part of that is because it's quite difficult to start getting into programming for After Effects, whereas with Nuke, and even I guess with After Effects had Pixel Bender, which was easy to make shaders, but the barrier to entry for making After Effects plugins is quite high. I suppose scripting for After Effects, the barrier is a lot lower, and a lot of people make their own workflow scripts, but not really many studios make their own plugins.
Yeah, people ask me all the time, oh, I have an idea for an After Effects plugin, and, how would I get started with that? And I would say, go back in time and go get a computer science degree and learn C++, because it is not a friendly or fun process.
That's interesting. So you know the process, but you've opted to I guess, hire other people to do it. But you seem like a pretty technically savvy guy. Is there a reason you chose to sort of outsource the programming?
I don't know. I mean, I have a friend who says that everyone thinks they know C++. No one knows C++. It's just that some people know it a little less poorly than others.
Right.
It's an extremely complicated language with its own memory management, and you can always get things faster, more optimized. And I just found that I was so many years behind some of the people that I could hire and work with. I would rather just focus on writing the algorithms and saying, okay, here, just make this happen and then make it fast and efficient. And I'd focus more on the UI and user experience.
Right, so you might write the algorithm and say, port this to C++ and make it so, and then the programmers will go and do that.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, and did you find it was difficult to find programmers for After Effects, or do you just hire people who know C++ and then maybe one guy who knows the bridge between the C++ and the SDK?
I think that pretty much all developers are used to learning new APIs. So at first I was trying to find someone who had made After Effects plugins before, and I realized like that's something where they can learn it in a month. So every person who I've hired, I just look for the best C++ experience, the best image processing experience, and say, okay, so you have about a month, maybe 6 weeks of training time to learn the After Effects API, build some simple shaders, build a plugin, and we'll figure it out from there. But I find that good C++ skill is really what you should be looking for, and just expect that it's going to be about 6 weeks before you actually really see anything productive.
Right. I guess to find someone that knows C++ and knows the After Effects SDK, they probably off making their own plugins or like, not really interested. But there's a lot of people who are really good at C++. So I think maybe that's where I went wrong, because when I was looking for a program, I was like, okay, they need to know C++, they need to know an After Effects SDK. And I found a Russian guy who he built me the plugin and then wouldn't respond to me for even after I'd paid him, because he's probably off just doing his own thing and he's not interested.
Yeah, I mean, that's another thing is I always... Okay, so when I got started, maybe I had just one developer, and now as a rule, because of what you just said, I always like to have like at least 2 or 3 people on any given plugin at any time. Because, they don't really owe us anything, just like us. We can leave a job at an animation studio anytime we want. So can they. Like, it's totally not personal. You just have to treat it like you're managing any other business and not rely too much on one person.
Right, because if you do and they walk away, then you're kind of stuffed, and working with someone else's code is not very, especially if they've written it in a very cryptic way, it can be very difficult to decipher.
Yeah, I had a fantastic developer. This is one person who I can't thank enough, again, wishing to remain anonymous, and he had kids, and it's like, okay, he's going to go back to his day job and just focus on being a dad. And now, luckily, throughout the entire process, I had him working with some other people who could, pick up from where he left off. But if you're going to be making After Effects plugins and you're relying on another developer, you kind of need 2 or 3. So the cost barrier to get into After Effects plugin development is completely insane.
And you think that's probably the biggest reason, the cost development, or do you think it might be just, it's so niche and there's so little information out there that it's just really hard to get into it?
When I got started, and again, I'm speaking about my naive younger self, this is back 8-9 years ago, I thought, I have an idea for an After Effects plugin, and to write out the idea, the algorithm is just extremely simple. Maybe the whole idea for Composite Brush, you could fit that on a couple of pages and explain it. I'm like, so this will take a programmer 2 days to put together? Like, yeah, I'll just do it. And now, no.
Yeah, I can imagine Composite Brush wasn't made in 2 days.
Yes, that is, to clarify, that was my naive younger self. And a lot of people tell me, I have an idea for a plugin. I bet you and your team could mock this up in a weekend. And I'm like, no, it's like to get anything working, I feel like you don't even see anything for 2 months. Like, you don't even see like a test version for like 2 months, no matter how simple your plugin is. Unless, of course, you're working off of an existing skeleton that's similar.
Yeah, and that can be daunting, and you can get, sort of feel like, oh, I'm not making any progress, this is too hard, and then people quit. And yeah, I suppose that's why there are so few plugin developers out there compared to the amount of customers that want plugins.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people are, maybe when they go to hire someone to build a plugin, they have some experience building scripts in After Effects, and they see how fast and easy it is to put together a script. But
Yeah,
they're
it's
a
very
little
fast.
bit, they have the idea because it's so easy to do some sort of script function where you're just like calling on After Effects to do the heavy lifting. Like, oh, After Effects, like duplicate a layer. And that's just like one line of code. Whereas in the C++ world, it's like, copy the sequence data. I'm like...
Yes, and caching and all this crazy stuff, yeah.
And it's like that one little thing that you do in a script is going to be like pages of code in C++, and it's going to crash. And it might work different in the different versions of After Effects.
Different versions, different operating system.
Yeah,
there's a lot of headaches to that. Were there some technical constraints within the After Effects SDK where you wanted some certain functionality, but it just wasn't possible?
The biggest restraint with the After Effects SDK is probably rendering to the UI. That's the biggest difficulty for us. So with Lockdown, we draw points and we draw lines over the video, right?
Yeah.
And initially we were drawing that on the UI, but it was moving a little slow. And the issue is when you play back or scrub it, it's lagging behind the video. So how do you evaluate a tracking point if it's not rendering on the video? You don't.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, you just don't. So in the last version of Lockdown 1.3, we started rendering directly to the video because that's the best way to evaluate the track. However, now whenever you add a point or delete a point, that invalidates the render and you have to re-render. So that's super slow. The biggest limitation to working within After Effects is that the UI and the video render are not like stapled together and not built in such a way that it would make Lockdown easy to create.
Right, so did you end up going with the render to video, or was because deleting a point invalidates the cache, was that a hurdle that you just decided to just draw over the original frames?
We're rendering it all directly to the render thread in After Effects, so it's actually rendered on the video. If you went to add it to the render queue, you would see our dots and lines, and it just seemed like the lesser of two evils.
Right. Yeah, that's actually similar with one of my plugins called Effect Mat, where you can sort of, it draws a guideline of where the layer will be matted. And unfortunately, yeah, if you render it, it's going to bake into the video because that was just the ghetto way of getting it done. And if I knew the After Effects SDK better, I could be drawing that as an overlay, like, in Sapphire and those plugins, they've got all those overlays on the video, but I just haven't got that far yet. But that's on me because I'm lazy.
Yeah. Well, we've come to the same solution, so.
Yeah, it's interesting that I guess the user just has to be aware. It's kind of like a watermark. They need to turn it off, otherwise it's going to be baked into their frames.